Hey everybody, what's going on? So yeah, The Last of Us Part 2 has been out for just a week now. Started it up as soon as it dropped at midnight and just played through it every day until about late Sunday. Took me about 25 hours and maybe 30 minutes in total to beat the whole thing. And since then, there's a lot still on my mind about it, a lot I want to talk about, and I wanted to give this, a proper in-depth look. I think it is worth mentioning up top here, though, that I did just play The Last of Us for the first time, ever, just a little over a week ago. So, like, basically right into The Last of Us Part 2. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out very quickly on. It might not really matter too much, but I thought it was worth mentioning. But yeah, so there's not much else to add other than that. And so let's just jump right in. So really the first thing I think anyone will notice with this game is clearly how stunning the visuals are. Especially if you're jumping like immediately from the first one right into this one like I was in the span of like a few days, if not even a few hours, or if you're replaying the first one. I think it's pretty incredible seeing that leap that the first one made, even from the remastered version to this. You can just tell, from all the detail of it and the certain look to it all that games, from the last few years, and especially from the 7-year gap from the first one, that games have taken a huge jump in what they can do, what they can look like now. And maybe a lot of that cinematic gameplay that was incorporated here, helped out with that, and it made everything stand out just a little bit more, and it really focused in on just how detailed everything was, and it really focused in on the characters and the landscapes and all that with the cinematics. It of course is going to look amazing, but aside from those moments, even just when you're normally just going through Seattle or just walking in any kind of environment you're in, it just all looked so real. It felt like you were really like walking in this fully developed world, and more than just how everything looked, it was sort of the way everything moved and acted, and being able to just really flesh out all these environments and really take a good look at like what these games can do now. And I love that. Even little things like the clickers, and seeing the updated versions of all these things, the clickers looked and sounded better. And I guess alongside with the visuals, the audio of it, everything sounded so much better, and the infected were more terrifying because of how they looked and how they felt and how they acted. They sounded scarier. They were their animations were scarier. Everything about that, like the details of all those things, they add up. And so yeah, the visuals just really added so much to this, and like even more than I can even explain. I think it was a huge improvement.
Those blind motherfuckers make my skin crawl.
Aside from the visuals and the story, I think ultimately, as probably in every single game you play, the gameplay needs to be the element that works the best. It's going to be what you're spending most of the time doing. If it doesn't play well, if it doesn't feel right, it's going to be a big problem that you're going to have just constantly. So, you really want it to run as fluidly as possible. And I will just quickly mention that I've seen the absolute bare minimum of like other reviews and thoughts on this game, aside from just like social media posts that are impossible to avoid. But I wanted to bring that up because there's a few times in those social media posts, like I've seen that people really thought the gameplay was too similar to the first games. And I guess, I do agree with that for sure, but only to a certain extent. Because of course, all the mainstays from the first game are still here. You scavenge for items and supplies. When you're in combat, you're hiding and you're stealthing your way towards the enemies to take them out without anybody noticing. Again, that's a heavy element of the first one as well. And you're doing these things constantly. Like you're gonna take up a lot of time, hours of just trying to find items and slowly working your way through these combat parts of the game, taking people out. If you want to, you don't really have to stealth if you don't want to, but those are really familiar things you did in the first game, most of the time. So in a way, yeah, I guess it is similar definitely. I mean, it is a sequel. You're gonna have similar elements, but there are, some huge additions that they added to this, and the prone system they added, where you can just fully get on the ground, crawl your way through tall grass. Just crawl your way through underneath vehicles, underneath any kind of obstacle in your way. To try to find a way through. And in ways, I did like the ways that they use that for, again, like cinematic purposes rather than just to get your way towards an enemy without them seeing you. But I thought in both those ways it really added a lot. That it was a simple thing to add, but I think it was a nice addition that changed things up just enough. As well as with the dodge that they added. Specifically in the combat for this one, you dodge with L1 at certain points when you're fighting basically anybody. I think mostly the infected is when you're dodging, though. It for the most part, I thought it worked really well. It wasn't too easy, which is something I really enjoyed about it, because if it was like something you could just spam and not be hit by anybody and just dodge the whole time, I think maybe that wouldn't have been fun. But they did it in a way that was sort of tough. You had to time it. You couldn't just press L1 at any point and just like it was gonna dodge for you. You had to do it at the exact right time, and they come at you like constantly. They're taking multiple swings at you, so you have to be ready to dodge once and then get ready to dodge again. And so it was hard to, like, every time I would get into one of those situations, I was almost definitely going to be hit once or twice. So it wasn't something I necessarily wanted to do. If I was ever in a situation, I appreciated that I could dodge, but I was still going to get some hits on me, so I wasn't trying to get in those kinds of situations. So I'm glad it wasn't something you could easily just take advantage of. Then, of course, there was that added element of the dogs in this game, which was really cool. They could smell your trail, and they did a really good job here. Where they say, I guess, you're trying to find a way to trick them and get them to follow the trail to where, like, not towards you, to follow the trail in a different direction. I tried it a few times, but they're so fast and they're coming at you from different directions. There's usually a few humans involved, and one of them has the dog with them, so it's hard to get away from them. And it's especially tough because in the combat with the dogs, you do have to, unfortunately, just full on slaughter them a few times, and that's really tough to do. But it was also just, in general, the whole combat centered around the dogs was really tough. You don't want to take them out, and when you do, like, because you have to, you have to get around them, and they'll usually call out your position, and that was just a really cool thing that they added into. Again, a small addition, but that plays such a big role. And then there was some differences with the weapons too. They have the bow and arrow in the first game that sort of had that, like, very strong trajectory. It had a strong curve to it. But this bow and arrow was much more compact. It felt stronger. It felt like you could definitely aim and feel, because you could actually pull back on the bow and you could feel the weight of it. The first one, I'm not sure if that was a real, like, you just aimed and pressed R2. This one you could hold R2 and really get a strong feel for where you were aiming and where you were going to shoot that arrow. And then the fact that, Ellie has a knife on her at all times, so you don't have to create shivs anymore, which, her knife wasn't as strong as when you had the shivs. You couldn't really use them to get out of, like, the clicker combat, or when the clickers are on you like you could with the shivs. But it was definitely nice to have it on you at all times, so you wouldn't just punching and getting beaten up by all these people. You at least had a knife on you to do some. It felt like you were doing some more damage at least. There were a few different bomb options you had here to craft. And you could craft a trap mine, and you could craft a silencer for the pistol. And so all these things, they don't sound like vastly, different additions. They might not sound like huge things they put into this game, but they, again, like I said, they're all big elements to it because it didn't feel like they just added it for the sake of it. They added them to play a big role. I'm glad that they actually, gave a purpose to all of these additions and didn't just throw them in there. It's because they needed some new stuff. And so, yeah, I guess bringing in the whole thing, like, full circle. So, yeah, there are some very similar elements in this game to the first one, because of course there will be. I mean, this is a sequel, so there's going to be a lot of familiarity. There's going to be a few things added in, but you still want everything to feel distinctly The Last of Us, and that's exactly what all this was. I never felt like this was something taken from another game, taken from another built for another world. This was built for The Last of Us. All the new stuff they added in was built for this world that they were in, that you were in, and I love that. I mean, that's what you want. You really want it to feel distinct, The Last of Us, and that's exactly what this was. Alright, so it's no surprise that this, the story has caused the most heated discussions over the past few weeks. And before even mentioning anything about it, very quickly, I just want to acknowledge that isn't it great to have a fully fledged story in a game like this? I'm not saying that they don't exist in other games, but a story like this, something fully fledged, something fully, detailed, something they took time with, and something they clearly cared a lot about. I think it's more rare than it should be. And of course, I know it will come down to personal preference, because I know plenty of people that definitely don't care about, cinematics in these kinds of games. They just want to skip by them if they can, or just, they have them be shorter. They don't want all these like story-filled cutscenes and all that. And that's fine, I get it. It's not going to be for everybody. But just for me personally, nothing gets me more excited than a game like this, something that's willing to take that time and tell a story. And aside from everything about the story itself, this particular story, I think having one is super important to have. And I appreciate that they took the time to tell one, whether it was one you liked or not. Having one is always going to be better than not. So at least, again, in my opinion.
Teeth grinding thing.
But okay, so what did I think of this particular story? I gotta say, I really liked a lot of it. And to be very specific about it, I would say that not only did I like it, I loved half of the story. I'll get into this, a lot more in the latter half of this video with spoilers, but I think, it's not too spoilery to say that there's a character in the game that's very hard to like. And even now, like a week later, and all these hours thinking about the story and everything that we had to do in the game, I'm still a bit in shock of what they did. That's like what stuck with me the most, is how almost crazy a decision it was to center half of this game around her. And obviously I'm talking about Abby. So I want to point out that I don't hate her. I really don't. And I understand completely what they were trying to do here. I understand all the things they tried to do with their character and her storyline. I just really do feel like they could have accomplished the same thing without making us spend so much time with her and spending so much time away from Ellie. They stopped Ellie's story just completely dead in its tracks. It's a tough one to really wrap your head around thinking about it. And not really that, I guess I understand it. I know why they did it. It's just more so it's hard to understand why they made it so long, why they made you have to go through so much of this other half of the story that was always going to be extremely difficult to have any interest in. And I guess, they wanted it to be so long because if it forced you to go on that journey with her, if it forced you to see her side of things, that hopefully by the end of it all, you would see where she's coming from. And like the first Last of Us was about a 15-hour game, give or take. And that game, for all intents and purposes, is considered a masterpiece. And I think a lot of that had to do with the game having a perfect length. And it told everything it had to tell in that 15 hours. And so this game, being 25 hours, if you really break it down, you can see that basically those 10 extra hours they added into this was for the Abby storyline. And it's tough because, like, again, I see where they were coming from. I understand it completely. But I do think if they could have cut even just half of it, I don't want to say take it all out entirely, but I'm not saying that either. I feel like I really do feel like they could have accomplished what they wanted to without doing all that. I mean, there's a part of her story that I think was fun to play as, and I'll get into that later, but I really don't think we needed to spend all that time, because more importantly, not even because of Abby's story, but because of Ellie's story, the fact that we had to just cut it off and take so much time away from that. It was basically a buzzkill, and I was not disappointed in a way, but sad. I almost felt sad that as the hours kept going on, I just really I started to miss Ellie a lot, missed that other storyline. But all right, so that's all I got for the spoiler-free part of it. If that's all you were gonna watch, thank you. But I am gonna jump now into spoiler-heavy stuff. I guess really to start this out, I'll talk about not only Ellie but also her and Dina, because basically that's the closest thing in this game to, the Joel and Ellie duo of the first one. You were riding with her on the horse through Seattle for a good chunk of this. I think most of day 1 and day 2, I believe, is when it starts to become more of just Ellie's story. Maybe it is just right from the start of day 2 is when it becomes Ellie's story basically outright. But for the most part, her and most of these supporting characters, and even, Ellie herself, are a bit bland compared to what we got in The Last of Us. Ellie in that game is obviously just the coolest kid ever and brings a lot of life to the story and life to Joel, because Joel's also very stoic and, hardened character that's not saying too much. However, even though I would throw Ellie in that category too as not being someone that says a whole lot in this game, I still loved her character. I still loved where they took her character, the progression she had from this kid that was always talking. It felt like she was always, again, like she was the life of that first game. She's the life of just this world that you're playing in, this like really sad and horrific world. She was the life of it, and the spark. To kind of lose that, I don't think it's gonna make a lot of people happy for how more hardened she is, how much she's more like Joel was in the first game. But I loved it because that's exactly, at least it seems very realistic to what someone in her shoes would be in this, like where they would be in their life at this point. Growing up is always going to harden you a little bit, even when you're not living in a zombie apocalypse. So, like, of course, this world hasn't been very easy for her, and there's no way it's been easy for anybody. So where she is at now as a person and where she is at now in this game, maybe some people aren't gonna like love the fact that she's not, the Ellie of the first Last of Us. But again, that was one of my favorite things about this game. Like, I think it was so perfect how they made her act and how they made her feel, and the emotions she was feeling in this game. You could tell that it was such a strain on her, even though she wasn't saying much. It was all so subtle, and it was like heartbreaking to see all that. It just reminded me, a lot of myself growing up, and I'm sure a lot of you as like while playing this. It was a perfect depiction of that. I think, and so I love that they got to pick up her story at this point of her life. And so, like, as she's developing this relationship with Dina throughout this game, and the strong like connection they're building at the start of it, it was really sweet to see that, because you want Ellie to be happy. You want her to find a connection with somebody and to to really love somebody. And so while I wasn't extremely interested in Dina as a person, I don't think she was the most interesting character ever, I cared about her because Ellie cared about her. And I think that was the point, and I kind of missed her when she wasn't in the story as much, as the story progressed. When Ellie was on her own, I felt sad because I knew she was probably sad not being by her anymore and not having her by her side.
You should have kissed me then. I wanted to.
Me too.
But then also there's Tommy, who again doesn't play the biggest role ever. I think he plays a bigger role in the story, as in just, we don't see him a lot of the time, but his presence is always felt. They're always sort of, he's brought up a lot for sure. He's really just that last tie to Joel, last tie with Ellie's, to the story of the first Last of Us. I mean, he was in the first one, not a ton either, but he was there, so of course he gives us that familiarity and that connection that we need. And so I might have even wished he was in the game a little bit more because the fact he wasn't in the first game so much. And so I was hoping he would play a bit of a bigger role in this one, and he does and he doesn't. But he really is just more of that comforting presence, because you do lose Joel so early on. Speaking of Joel, you know, I do think the strongest character moments in this game were the flashbacks of him and Ellie together. And sure, I guess you could say maybe you know, some of those moments are cheap moments, you know, moments of nostalgia for the first one, and maybe, you know, that's not wrong, but I don't think there's any problem with that. A little nostalgia here and there, you know, is almost needed. Again, a comforting presence that you need in just those moments of real intense stuff going on, and to have those moments and to see the connection Ellie and Joel had back then are strong, and it's just also so bittersweet to see that, to relive, you know, some of those times they had together, knowing what their relationship, you know, becomes in the future, and knowing what, and also of course, you know, knowing the fate of Joel later on, and, you know, reliving these scenes, knowing those things, it's tough. But I think they're also like a necessary reminder also to just show, you know, everything Ellie has to deal with at such a young age, and why the lie that Joel told her at the end of The Last of Us was such a big deal. I think that's why the ending for that first game struck a chord with so many people, and why maybe a lot of people didn't think there needed to be a sequel to this game, because the ending of that game was perfect. But it wasn't a happy ending, you know? It was an ending of false hope. It was an ending that was always going to have massive repercussions to not only, you know, these characters we've grown to love, but the entire world at large. And I think it's clear from that ending that this story was unfinished, and, you know, maybe you still have the opinion that that's fine, you know, it's a bit of a cliffhanger, but that's where the story ended, and it doesn't have to go beyond that. But to leave that off there and just sort of be left to imagining, you know, what happened forever, you know, in a way that's just as big of a risk and just as big of a move as I think what they did for this game. So again, I don't see a right or wrong here. I don't think it was a right decision or a wrong decision to make a sequel to this. I just really do feel like that story was unfinished. I think it was important to see the repercussions of that lie Joel told, instead of just leaving it to the imagination forever.
15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
I really just don't see the fun in playing it safe, and that's the last thing that they did, that's for sure. They did not play it safe here. And, you know, speaking of that, I think this might be the most not playing it safe move that I can think of in any form of media, you know, or at least a story of this on this kind of scale. To take the person, you know, that killed as beloved a character as Joel, and then to force you to play her side of the story for basically half of the game, I mean, that's beyond just a bold choice. It's borderline insane. It's a crazy thing to do. What it is really is just the Hail Mary play that would be remembered forever, you know, the Doug Flutie, if it worked. Unfortunately, I don't think that it did. You know, maybe even more accurately, this is the hook and ladder or the trick play, you know, at the very, very end of the game, and you got it to a couple guys, you ran down the sidelines, threw it all the way across the sideline, back and forth, but you only got as far as the 10-yard line. It's just really respectable, I think, and, you know, almost downright impressive to even get that close to pulling off as bold of a choice as they made with that. But, you know, still, no matter how close you get, if it doesn't completely pay off for you, then, you know, ultimately it's still a loss. But, you know, just to be clear, I'm not saying that this video game as a whole was a loss. I just do really think that the Abby storyline, unfortunately, was.
In there. Abs, come here.
The storyline has been what's brought up the most, but I think this in particular is, of course, what most people are talking about from the story. I thought this was necessary to keep for last because, you know, while I don't think it's anywhere near the most important part of the game, it's pretty clear that this is, or could be, the determining factor on basically whether this game should be accepted or not. Because this happened so early on, it's almost giving you the decision to keep playing, to accept that this is what happened, or to just flat out throw everything of this game to the wayside and just, you know, consider it a complete failure. Because this decision, you know, is so stupid that the rest of the game just has no meaning whatsoever. And I think that's just really what's so dangerous about making a decision this huge so early in the game. I mean, and not only that, but the way that it happened, you know, that's really what's been at the forefront of the issue here. I've seen and heard that, you know, this situation in particular, especially with Joel himself, you know, is something that he would never do. That this was completely out of character, and it just made zero sense that he would, you know, trust Abby, a complete stranger, and go up there with Tommy. And, you know, I get it. I do. I mean, it's a tough one because it is out of character. It's out of character of what Joel in The Last of Us would do, because Joel in The Last of Us would never trust a stranger. He never would. He would never trust a stranger like he did with Abby. But I kind of think you know what I'm going to say here, which is that Joel in The Last of Us Part 2, maybe he would, because he did. I just personally can't accept this idea that it has to be, you know, lazy writing, because that feels more like a lazy excuse to me. I mean, you don't like what happened to a character that you love, but people change. I mean, even by the end of the first game, you know, it was obvious that Joel was a different person. I don't think he would have trusted anyone at that point where the first game ended, but, you know, give it 4 more years of actually, you know, trying to build a new life, you know, trying to have normalcy again, starting up a civilization there in Jackson. That's a lot of time. And I do believe that, you know, given the right circumstances, on the right day and the right night where Joel and Tommy ended up here, that he might have put his guard down for once, you know? He was really trying to give people a chance. And in order to have a normal life, you have to be able to trust people. And I think he wanted to trust Abby. He wanted to be able to just trust people again. And it all starts with, you know, one person at a time. And even if you can't accept any of that, you know, after all this time, after all these years, he still is more so like the Joel of the first game, that he wouldn't have ever let this happen, that he would have never trusted any stranger ever. Perhaps he just made a simple mistake. Nobody is free of those. You throw in a horrible blizzard, and, you know, I don't think it's a crazy idea that someone like Joel, with Tommy by his side no less, you know, would be willing to give them a chance. And unfortunately and sadly and, you know, as heartbreaking as it is, that decision cost him his life. But at the same time, it wasn't. Abby was going to find him one way or another. That's where the game started off. When we started as Abby for the first time, she was going to find Joel. I mean, we didn't know it at the time, but that's what her mission was. That's what her mission was always going to be. And she was lucky to run into him that particular night. But if she hadn't, maybe they meet up in town the next day, maybe on another run that he took, you know, by himself, if he ever did that. Or maybe she would have ran into him in his house if she was able to sneak in there and kill him when he was there, you know, by himself. There's no way to know what would have happened, but ultimately it wasn't his decision to trust Abby that cost him his life. It all still comes back to the decision Joel made to save Ellie's life at the hospital. What we've heard this whole time is that decision was between a cure and making a vaccine and Ellie's life, but if it was rephrased to be a decision between saving her life and sacrificing his own, I think he still would make that trade-off every single day of the week. And maybe it took 4 years, but that was the decision Joel made that day, even if he didn't know it at the time, that he chose her life over his own and over the life of many others. And it came back to bite him. And I think it was always going to. So it sucks, it really does, but that was the question we were left off with after the first one. What is the cost of this lie? What are the ramifications of him telling her this lie? And this was it. It cost him everything. And for him, I think it was worth it.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I'm not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed to make this man of me. All my stolen missing parts, I've no need for any more. 'Cause I believe, and I believe 'cause I can see our future days, days of you and me. There you go.
Well, that didn't suck.
I'll take what I can get.
It all winds up at the very end here in the water, the two boats, Ellie and Abby fighting off. I haven't seen too many people talk about the very end of this game. I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen too many reviews or anything. So I've mostly heard opinions on the bigger moments earlier in the game. But this point, when she's just beating on Abby as much as she can, and you know, this whole journey has been similar for both of them. Abby went through with what she was going for. She killed Joel, which was that was her mission. Ellie's goal was now the same. It was to find Abby and kill her, but she doesn't do it. She stops. She lets her go. She lets her go with Lev, and Ellie's left there to deal with that decision she's made. And I think, again, it's going to cause a lot of heated discussions, because I think a lot of people want Abby to die very badly. I don't think they were ever going to give her the benefit of the doubt. I don't think they were ever going to give her a shot. She was evil incarnate from the moment she hit Joel, the moment she shot Joel, and from the moment she killed him. Unforgivable forever, which is fair. I don't think that's a crazy thing to think. If she's unforgivable in your eyes, that's fine. But in Ellie's eyes, she clearly wasn't. Maybe she didn't completely forgive her for it, but she was willing to spare her life for it, which is huge. And maybe it wasn't even for Abby. And I don't think it was. I think it was for Ellie. I think it was for Joel. I think thinking back on those flashbacks, and I think that's why it's so important that the game ended just moments after that flashback where she was willing to forgive Joel for what he did. Being able to forgive him for telling her that lie that affected everything. That even if she, thought that he lied for years, to actually hear it come out of his mouth and to hear that he did lie to her all those years ago in that crucial moment, as she said, for something that would have made her life matter, or to at least try and forgive him for that, is as big of a thing you can do for anybody. And it's because of that she did what she did with Abby. The reason she spared her life. She knew in that moment that killing her was not going to solve anything. This was purely, at the very end of it, I think, a decision based off of Ellie. Not some profound, huge statement about humanity. This was about Ellie realizing killing Abby was not worth it to her. It was not worth it to Joel. And, I get if you don't agree with it. I get if this didn't move you at all, but that was powerful to witness that. It was powerful to have to experience that firsthand, to see it all right there in front of your eyes, and see it in Ellie's eyes, and to see her make that decision. If none of that in that moment moved you at all, then fine, this game wasn't for you, and it's not going to be for everybody. That's cool. It moved me in a way that I don't think I've ever experienced in any game before. And for that, there's nothing I can say except that I absolutely love The Last of Us Part 2. Alright, so, finally, after all of that, my final thoughts on this game is that it's really unlike anything I've ever played before. Not in the sense of what you do, because, I said it multiple times, this is a sequel. We've all played this game before. It's called The Last of Us. But what's so different about it is the emotional journey it's willing to take you on, whether that emotion is filled with sadness or empathy or love and even utter hatred. It was willing to take those risks. It brought us along on this adventure filled with loss, filled with death, and completely hate-fueled revenge on two sides. But it was one that was filled with real people, authentic human feelings. And at the end of the day, at the end of all of this, there's nothing I can do but applaud them for that. And yeah, so thank you so much for watching, all of you. It really means the world to me. I hope you're all doing well out there and staying safe. I hope you're all feeling great and staying healthy. And, if you want to come back for the next one, that'll be awesome. But if you're just stopping by, I appreciate it so much, and I'll see you later.